Hey everyone, in this one I want to talk about range again. A few videos ago I talked about range, and I want to talk about range here from a broader perspective by imparting another story. So whereas the previous story involved photographs and so on, this one's going to involve range and a story that about something that happened in high school. In any case, I was in math class. My friend Aaron starts comparing dating to cereals. And I'm like, what the hell are you doing, Any case, he's like, I was a freshman or sophomore. I remember my friend Ray Lynn's next to me. And he starts saying, you know what? You could have cornflakes for your whole life and be happy, Literally be happy. But if you would never know if you don't expose yourself to like Cocoa Puffs or like Tricks or anything else, Fruit Loops, you name it. You would never know if you like that cereal more, right? And, we followed along, of course. And he's like, dating's the same way. He's like, you could totally be with somebody forever and be super happy, but not know whether or not, you would be happier in, in other circumstances. And I was like, wow, man, who would have thought cereal could be so deep? And the whole table, like people started listening because it was like the deepest conversation I've ever had about cereal ever. In fact, I don't even think I've ever had anybody bring about cereal in such a philosophical way. But the conversation took place, The whole point was that exposure to other things allows you to have a wider range. Writing's not different. Poker's not different. So let's leave writing for the end and start with poker first. Poker, the way I went about poker was in a very timid, tight aggressive fashion early on. And then later on, as I grew as a player, I began experimenting with different hand ranges and not just playing with narrow sets of hands. So, players, a lot of the times, I'm going to generalize, but stereotypes are a thing for a reason because a lot of times they hold true, although not always. So I started playing with narrow hands, usually only playing the strongest hands. The problem is that leaves you being predictable. It's kind of like writing and sticking to a narrow set of words. Yeah, you might write well, you might even master those words, but that doesn't mean that you wouldn't be better off without exposing yourself to more words and deliberately going about your way to, increasing your exposure, whether it's literally hand selecting specific words you enjoy or reading somebody else's work. Hand ranges are the same, and one thing that's very popular in poker is employing suited connectors, 10-9 suited, 10-8 suited, gap connectors, etc., etc. And with your exposure to more hands, not unlike exposure to more words, you begin growing as a player, and sometimes you're going to make mistakes. In fact, a lot of times you're going to make mistakes when you first learn those words, because while you might employ them and they might make sense, you'll learn that they'll make more sense or be more streamlined in other scenarios. Life's the same way. You expose yourself to circumstances, places, people, and in the range that you do, you're going to find things that you enjoy. Why do I say this? Is because a lot of times we tend to be comfortable in whatever we do and whatever we choose, but we tend to live life from only like a certain spectrum of colors. It's like we only live through yellows or greens or blues or blacks instead of the entire spectrum. And I find that as I've grown comfortable with a lot of things, it's actually kind of fun to experiment with a lot of different ranges, whether it's writing, poker, you name it, meeting people. It doesn't matter. Range is interesting in a lot of different ways, and you'd be surprised what you can learn about yourself, about other people, about life, about writing. Ultimately, I'm trying to center this with the foundation of writing, but it really applies to anything. When it comes to range, there's no limit to range. That's what makes life so important. There's not one place that you can visit. There's not just one person you can meet. There's not only just one circumstance. Hell, there's not even just one circumstance with just one person. Like you can run into the same person in 1,000 different ways. That just kind of hit me. That could be a totally different topic altogether. But the whole point is that there's range, and there's a lot to be said for exposure to that range, because the more you're exposed to it, the more you realize what you like and what you dislike. So, for instance, there's a lot of things about poker, writing, that I realized that I was like, all right, the more I expose myself to certain hand ranges, hand combinations, or word combinations, or words in those separate subjects, poker and writing, the more I realize, you know what, I really like these words. They're fun, they're interesting. I really like these hand ranges. Same thing, fun, interesting, especially because there's only so many, in poker at least, there's only so many hand combinations you can experiment. But even though that may be true, well, actually, there's only a certain amount of hand combinations. But even though that's true, there's literally endless ways of playing it because game dynamics are going to be different. People are going to be different. Like the settings going to be different. Is it online? Or are you playing multiple tables with the same person? Are you playing heads up? Or are you playing 6 max? Are you playing 9-handed? Are you playing a tournament? You know, same thing with writing. You can have the same word, and you can employ it in a non-fiction article. You can employ it in a fictional story. You can employ it in a blog. You can employ it in a poem. You can employ it in a rhyming poem. You can employ it in a book. You know, there's literally no end to the amount of ways that you can employ one word. You know, and when you begin expanding, you know, your repertoire, it makes things interesting because it's like having extra ammunition. You know, I remember hearing Eminem talk about that when it came to rapping. You know, the more combinations, the more rhymes, the more things that you're lyrically, you know, capable of doing and adept to do, the more you're going to be able to do. You know, it's like ammo. It's like a stack in poker. You know, the bigger the stack you are, the more you can do with it. The more you can bluff. The more aggressive you can be. The more hands you have. The more words you know. Same thing. You know, the more places you visit, the more you're like, all right, that place is fun, or that place is not fun. That place is for me. That place is not me. Same thing with people. You know, so the whole point is that there's fun and there's intrigue and there's also lessons to be learned and the full set of range that you can expose yourself in whatever topic it is and whatever subject it is. You know, it really, there's no end to it. And it's actually a very intriguing subject, you know, range. And then, you know, that could be the umbrella subject. And then it could just go into poker. It could go into life. It can go into writing. It could go into meeting people. Like, holy smokes. And the thing is, you know, for instance, one thing I've learned is that when you're meeting people, there's people that will talk about only one thing and that's it. Like, there's literally people, sorry about that, totally notification just blocked half the screen. There's people that I've met that will only talk about the game and that's the only thing that they'll talk about, you know, every time. Like, I've met people that, you know, 12, 15 conversations in, it's always the game. And it's always like, oh, we won or we lost. And I'm like, all right, that's cool. But that's it, you know, that's the extent of the range. And or sometimes it's two topics or 3 topics, or sometimes it's more. And, you know, I don't know, call me narrow-minded, but the more range a person has, the more interesting they are, you know? Like, if all you're going to talk about is one subject, that's cool. But, you know, it's kind of like having rice all day, you know, or going to the same place all the time, like literally every single day, 3 times a day or something. I don't know, you know. And I'm not talking about like where you're forced to like work or something like that. I'm talking about like willingly expose yourself to only to a limited set of instances. So the whole point is that every time the conversation gets so predictable, it's like you can almost write it out before it even happens. We won or we lost, and that's it. But there's no growth in that. There's really no, like, there's nothing interesting, you know? Same thing with writing. If you were to, I learned from from a writer one time years ago in a podcast that writers are always battling repetition, and that's true. I couldn't, you know, that's just something that I see it happen with pretty much everybody that I read extensively, and I battle it myself. Where you find yourself, particularly if you're doing like poetry or things that are, you know, very similar in nature, you know, you might open the same way. There's actually a really big writer that does reviews that literally almost has the exact same format. I'm not going to mention the name, but the whole point is that the writer ends up using exact format, and that's it, you know, slotting specific quotes in specific places, etc., etc., etc. And it's almost like a schematic, and all you do is switch the words around, and that's it, or switch the quotes around, and that's cool and all, but like there's no growth there. And I'm the type of person that I'm trying to push myself into growing more, because, for instance, had I not done that, then I wouldn't have been able to write book reviews, and I wouldn't be able to grow as a poet. Like, so for instance, 2 or 3 years ago, if you were to read my book reviews back then, they were atrocious. You know, they were just really bad. But 6 months later, they got better. 6 months after that, they got better. 6 months after that, they got better, because I continue exposing myself to more books, you know, poetry, other things, fiction, etc. And same thing with poetry. You know, the more you expose yourself to more poems, more poets, more circumstances, more people, the more you're going to get from it, you know? And given that we pretty much learn by osmosis, whether we like it or not, there's something to be said for the exposure that you willingly subject yourself to, because sometimes you don't have a choice to what you subject yourself to, but most of the time you do. So make sure that whatever you're choosing is good for you. Talk to you guys later. Take care.